Hi there. Today I'd like to tackle another one of the topics that was suggested when I started asking for suggestive topics. This one is hyperfocal distance and manual focus. Well, for manual focus, let's keep it brief. I don't use it a lot. I use it more with my mirrorless cameras or with live view on my DSLR because I do find that my eyesight doesn't allow for really sharp, clear manual focusing without a focus aid. Back in the film days, my cameras had a split image center focus aid that got me sharp focus. Nowadays, some cameras, especially entry-level models from some companies, have a pentamirror instead of a pentaprism, like my old DL had, and it made manual focus quite difficult. But works really well if you have help such as live view that allows you to either magnify a part of the image very closely in order to be able to sharply focus, or that has focus peaking. So, if I'm not saying much more about manual focus, then what am I going to talk about? Hyperfocal distance. Right now, this is being videoed on an Olympus body cap lens. That is a fixed f8 aperture. It doesn't change. It's a 15mm lens, which is a very short focal length. The shorter the focal length for a given aperture, the greater the depth of field. Now, depth of field. Some people unfortunately believe that depth of field means that everything within that is in perfect focus. That's not true. All depth of field means is that we have our focus point, then we have a range of acceptable focus. Now, what does acceptable focus mean? It all depends. The old point and shoot brownies and things like that your parents or grandparents may have used for taking family snapshots, in old 126 cartridge format or 127 roll film or 620 roll film. All those cameras, including the 110 by the way, they used hyperfocal distance. They basically had a lens that had a fixed focus. It could not be focused. It was fixed at a given distance, and it had a small enough aperture that a great deal then would be in focus. That's why they always use the sun over your shoulder rule when taking pictures outdoors, because of course they had no way of controlling exposure and so on in order to be able to take care of backlit scenes, and they needed as much light as possible because of the slow lenses and slow film. So, how does that apply today? Well, as you can see from these examples, looking at the barrel of a 50mm f2 Pentax manual focus lens, you'll notice that there is a depth of field scale. If I set the aperture at f22 and then I put the infinity mark on the f22 at the far left, everything from there over to that point on the far right is in acceptable focus. That means that for a 4x6 print, or maybe up to an 8x10, everything is going to look pretty good. The old line used by photojournalists, how do you set your camera, f8 and be there, is another example of that, because of course if you set your camera on f8 with a fairly wide lens, then things are pretty much all in reasonable focus. This is a 28mm Reconon lens. Notice that the depth of field scale is much shorter. That's because this lens has an unfortunately short focus throw. It does not turn much when you focus it. The short focus throw makes it a little harder to use this scale. However, being a 28mm lens, it will have significantly more depth of field for a given aperture than the 50 would. So set this lens on f8 and set the aperture, the infinity mark, at the f8 on the left, and of course you have a very large amount that's going to be in focus. So folks, if you are into something like street photography and you have a manual focus lens with a focus scale, I noticed that a couple of the Olympus lenses have that. I think some of the Fujinon lenses for Fuji have that. And of course there are manufacturers that make manual focus lenses, such as Voigtlander, that makes lenses that are still manual focus, as well as Zeiss. All you have to do is set your aperture at some middle value. f8's usually a good one. Then, using the depth of field scale, determine what will be in focus. And you can move that a little. It doesn't have to be actual hyperfocal, which means that it's in focus pretty much to infinity. Instead, you can decide what range needs to be in focus. You can then use that depth of field to get reasonably sharp pictures at that range. So if you're shooting pictures on the street, for instance, you can literally make your camera into the ultimate point and shoot, because you will no longer have autofocus time to concern yourself with, nor will you have to worry about things not being, the camera not locking onto the correct object. Instead, you're going to talk about reasonable sharpness throughout that distance. And remember, there's still only one focus point. The rest is just reasonably sharp. If you take pictures taken by those old cameras and blow them up to 20 by 30, you would find lots of focus errors. However, in a typical 4x6 print, they're going to look fine. And that's about it, folks. Hyperfocal. Learn more about it. Go online, do a little research, lots of videos, lots of tutorials. You'll have no trouble learning how to use this very, very useful feature of optics. Well, if you liked this video, click like. If you would like to see more of these videos, click subscribe. And if you think somebody might get some help by seeing this video, then share it. Well, so long for now. Bye.